Daniel Hoffman, former CIA station chief who served as chief of station in Moscow and elsewhere, also a Foster contributor. Daniel, always good to see you.
You too.
A big surprise this week when Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, Putin's right-hand man when it comes to foreign affairs, made a surprise visit to Pyongyang, really laid some flowers and wreaths at some monumental sites and had some high-level meetings. What do you make of Lavrov suddenly going off to Kim Jong-un?
Yeah, we've been accustomed to talking about Russian meddling in our elections, and now we're seeing Russian meddling in our efforts to bring peace to the Korean Peninsula. Lavrov hadn't been to Pyongyang in almost a decade, and what's noteworthy about his visit, it was entirely public. He didn't apparently have any private meetings. This was for the public to consume, and it was definitely a message to North Korea's leadership. He had public meetings with Kim Jong-un, as well as a message to the United States. His focus was on sanctions, and he talked about ratcheting down the sanctions before North Korea takes the action that we deem necessary to eliminate their nuclear weapons arsenal.
What is in Russia's interest, and what did Lavrov, do you think, say to Kim Jong-un during those meetings?
Well, I think first it's worth remembering that North Korea is an old Soviet satellite state. In fact, the first leader of North Korea, Kim Il-sung, was a major in the Soviet Red Army and fought against the Japanese during World War II. The Soviets installed him as the leader, the first leader of North Korea. That's not taught in North Korean history books for their students, but it's a true fact. The Russians absolutely want to play a role in the diplomacy in the region. First and foremost, they want to counter the United States strategically. They're very concerned about the United States' influence in the region, both militarily and politically. They'd like to reduce our military presence and our influence. So I think that's part of the reason why they support Kim Jong-un. It's a legacy from the Soviet days. They also support Kim Jong-un because they frankly don't like sanctions to which they've been subjected, and rightly so, for invading Ukraine and interfering in elections in Western Europe and the United States. They also see a lot of political and potential economic benefit from resisting those sanctions. They believe that if our relationship with Kim Jong-un and North Korea does pan out, they want to be there and to take advantage of increased trade. They're already violating the sanctions with some export of oil and allowing North Korean guest workers to reside and work inside Russia, but I see that they'd like to do a lot more economically with North Korea.
So they want a piece of the pie, and as you're right, at the UN they've been saying that the Russians have been busting those sanctions with the oil tankers transporting oil that has been embargoed against Pyongyang, that they've been doing the end run around, evading the sanctions that they have basically voted for the Security Council.
Yeah, that's right. I think it's a balancing act for them. They know they need to do a little bit, and I think, frankly, President Trump's show of strength concerned them. They were nervous about the potential for hostilities between the United States and our allies and North Korea, and so they did take some action with sanctions, but you're absolutely right. They have been busting them a little bit. There's a port city, Nakhodka, which has been the site of some export of Russian goods to North Korea, and Vladivostok is only about 60 miles from the North Korean border. That's Russia's strategic port.
So the president wasn't really thrilled. Lavrov suddenly popped up during all this. Here's what the president had to say about that the other day.
I didn't like the Russian meeting yesterday. I said, what's the purpose of that? But it could be a positive meeting. If it's a positive meeting, I love it. If it's a negative meeting, I'm not happy. And it could very well be a positive meeting.
While they're discussing a possible Putin-Trump presidential summit, what do you think the president should say and now do in light of Lavrov's visit?
Well, first, I think the president would keep in mind, I'm sure he'll be keeping in mind the failures of the previous administration. The Obama administration believed that Russia was on our side in Syria. And when the Russians said, when Minister of Foreign Affairs Lavrov told Secretary Kerry that there was no military solution in Syria, Lavrov was lying about that. Russia imposed a military solution on behalf of Assad. And so we know that Russia doesn't have our best interests at heart in the Korean Peninsula, and I think the president knows that. I think Secretary Pompeo will be a great consigliere to him, as will our new director of CIA, Gina Haspel, who is a subject matter expert on Russia. I think key right now will be our intelligence community furnishing the president with the intelligence he needs so that he'll be in the know about what Russia and Putin's real plans and intentions are in the Korean Peninsula. But I think the best leverage that we've got against North Korea is by pushing this bilateral relationship that we enjoy right now with the North Koreans. I think the president's meeting yesterday with Kim Young-chol, that was extraordinarily important. Those are the relationships I think that negotiations really depend upon. And we saw Secretary Pompeo, who's visited North Korea twice and met with Kim Young-chol 2 times there, essentially deliver a warm turnover to the president. And I think that's how we handle Russia, is by focusing on our bilateral engagement with North Korea. We tried the 6-party talks, and 2 of those parties, Russia and China, are really not out to help us too much.
So finally, Daniel, I guess you would say, is the president upstaged Putin? That one reason maybe why Lavrov made that trip, that Putin sees himself kind of on the outs, or at least not part of this ongoing process where the president sets the June 12th summit with Kim Jong-un.
Yeah, I think that's an insightful assessment. I would agree 100%. I think the Russians are a little bit nervous that the United States has seized the initiative. There's no question that President Trump has seized the initiative in the Korean Peninsula, and that does cause Vladimir Putin some concern, and they are on the outside. It was a very public effort on the part of Vladimir Putin and the Kremlin, using Lavrov to make a statement publicly. We'll see how well it works. I think we're doing a good job, though, of countering Russia.
All right, well, it feels great to have an insightful assessment on something. Daniel Hoffman, as always, thank you.